Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is pure time travel comfort. A phone booth lands in San Dimas, and suddenly history starts spilling into the suburbs like it belongs there. Napoleon tearing through a mall. Socrates getting turned into Socrates. Genghis Khan discovering modern chaos. George Carlin showing up as Rufus, with that calm future cool authority. And Bill and Ted moving through all of it with total air guitar confidence. But under that easy vibe, the movie almost disappeared before it ever reached theaters. Getting this weird script onto the big screen took a fight. A chain of yes that nearly fell apart. The phone booth became the movie's signature image. And one of the things the cast hated most. And once it finally hit, it did not stay a one-off for long. It became a franchise. These are 11 weird facts about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the comedy that sounds stupid on purpose and still somehow plays like a classic. Number 1. Bill and Ted feels so easy now. It is hard to imagine how weird the first version was. But before the phone booth, before Napoleon, before the movie really locked in, it was something much rougher. The first script was called Bill and Ted's Time Van, which tells you right away the movie had not found its real shape yet. Rufus was still sending the boys through time, but instead of a phone booth, he gave them a 1969 Chevrolet van. The premise is recognizable. The identity isn't. A van fits the slacker vibe, but it does not give the movie the strange little snap the phone booth eventually did. And the deeper you go into that early version, the messier it gets. Bill and Ted were still bouncing through history, still collecting famous people for their report. But the comedy leaned harder into random chaos. Julius Caesar showed up. Babe Ruth showed up. At one point, the boys even helped cavemen discover fire so they can light tobacco. You can feel the script throwing out idea after idea, still trying to figure out what kind of stupid it wanted to be. Then it hit the wrong edge. In that version, the historical figure loose in modern Sandus was Hitler. That is the moment where you can feel the movie pulling in the wrong direction. A fish out of water gag works when the figure is ridiculous or arrogant in a way the movie can turn playful. Hitler changes the temperature completely. The joke stops feeling light and starts carrying the wrong kind of weight. Swapping him out for Napoleon was not a small fix. It was the movie realizing what kind of comedy it actually wanted to be. The Time Machine needed that same correction. A time travel vehicle in the late 1980s was dangerous territory after Back to the Future had already burned that image into pop culture. The phone booth solved that instantly. It gave Bill and Ted its own silhouette, its own icon, its own weird little stamp. Suddenly, the whole concept looked cleaner, funnier, and much easier to remember. Bill and Ted only really became Bill and Ted once those pieces got stripped away, not when the premise showed up. When the chaos finally found the right shape. Number 2, once the script finally started looking like the right movie, it ran straight into the next problem. Nobody wanted to finance it. That was the real danger early on, not the premise. The premise worked. 2 clueless teenagers using time travel to survive a history report is the kind of idea that gets a laugh fast. The trouble came when that laugh had to turn into real money. And that is where the project kept stalling. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure did not fit cleanly anywhere. Too strange for a normal teen comedy. Too goofy to sell like straight science fiction. Too odd to feel safe. People could see the fun in it. They just did not want to be the studio writing the check. Stephen Herrick saw the comic engine immediately. But seeing how the movie could work and convincing a studio to risk real money on it were 2 very different battles. The clearest example was Warner Brothers. For a moment, it looked like the movie had finally found a home. Then Warner backed away. The concept already felt risky, and the budget made it worse. The film reportedly needed around $10 million, and Warner did not want to be the one testing whether something this weird could carry that price. That is how movies like this usually die. Not because the idea is bad, because everybody waits for somebody else to go first. Then it reached Dino De Laurentiis, and for the first time the project stopped feeling hypothetical. Once his company stepped in, Bill and Ted was no longer just a script people liked in theory. It had real backing, a real path forward, and a real chance to exist. Number 3, the movie was finally financed. Now, the question was, who would play Bill and Ted? That turned into a huge search. Somewhere around 200 to 300 actors reportedly came in for the roles. And the names that floated through the process tell you how wide the net really was. Pauly Shore, River Phoenix, Sean Penn, Brendan Fraser. The movie was not just looking for 2 funny guys. It was looking for a duo, and that is a much harder thing to fake. Keanu Reeves clicked early. He was only 23, but he already had real screen presence, and the filmmakers knew fast that they wanted him in the movie. That solved half the problem. The other half was harder because Bill and Ted does not work if one guy is funny and the other guy just fills the frame. The whole movie runs on rhythm. The The way they talk, the way they react, and the way one dumb idea instantly becomes two. If the chemistry is off, the whole thing collapses. Then, Alex Winter walked in. He was 22, already getting noticed after The Lost Boys. And during the audition process, he and Reeves connected almost immediately. Off to the side, they started talking about music and their interests, and the ease was there right away. When they read together, it did not feel like two actors trying to act like friends. It felt like the movie had found its pulse, and that changed more than the casting. In the earlier version, Bill and Ted leaned more toward dweebs, the kind of kids who would read as social losers. But Reeves and Winter did not give off that energy. They were too naturally relaxed, too comfortable, too likable. So, the movie adjusted around them. Instead of forcing them into a nerdier mold, the film let Bill and Ted become laid-back slackers with a weird accidental coolness. Not pathetic, not polished, just two underachievers you actually wanted to spend time with. So, the casting did not work because the movie found two actors who matched the original plan. It worked because the chemistry was better than the plan. Number 4, even after Bill and Ted clicked, the movie still had one huge problem sitting right in the middle of it. It did not have Rufus. That is a crazy place to be once cameras are already rolling, because Rufus is not some side character you can solve later. He is the guide, the future guy, the one person who can walk into the movie, explain the rules, and still keep the tone alive. If that casting misses, the whole thing tilts. And for a while, the part kept drifting. The early version of Rufus leaned much harder into the movie's rock and roll side. In the first script, he was younger, closer to 28, and one of the big dream names was Eddie Van Halen. That made a certain kind of sense. The movie keeps talking about Van Halen anyway, but that version died for the most normal reason in Hollywood. They could not afford him. After that, the roles started bouncing through a bizarre lineup of possibilities. Charlie Sheen, Roger Daltrey, Ringo Starr, Sean Connery. Those names do not point to one clear idea. They point to a production still trying to figure out what Rufus is supposed to feel like. Rock star, comic authority, weird elder guide, cool future messenger. Then a real opening appeared through producer Scott Crew. He was also working on Outrageous Fortune, which starred George Carlin, and that connection gave the movie a shot. Carlin was not the obvious version on paper. He was older than the original concept, and he was not coming in with Eddie Van Halen energy. But once he became possible, the role started making a different kind of sense. Carlin was hesitant at first. A teen sci-fi comedy was not exactly his lane. Then, he responded to the script's optimism. He liked that the movie believed kindness mattered. That changed it. And once he stepped in, the part stopped drifting. Because Carlin did not play Rufus like a stiff exposition machine. He gave him enough authority to sell the rules, enough cool to belong in the movie, and enough warmth that he never felt like he came from somewhere smarter and meaner. He fit above Bill and Ted without floating away from them. The movie kept searching for somebody to play the part. Then George Carlin showed up and quietly told it who Rufus was. Number 5, you remember the phone booth? The lights, the noise, the way it drops into the movie and suddenly everything opens up. That booth is the whole spell of Bill and Ted. It is the image fans carry away. The machine that turns two clueless San Andreas kids into time travelers and makes the whole movie feel bigger, stranger, and a lot more fun. It also became one of the worst things Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter had to deal with on the entire shoot. To make the circuits of time scenes work, the production mounted the booth on a gimbal and physically rocked it around in front of effect screens, and the setup only got worse from there. The booth was cramped with just the two actors inside. Sometimes crew had to squeeze in too, trying to run the effect while the whole thing shook around them. So, the movie's happiest invention turned into a tiny moving box full of bodies, lights, mechanics, and aggravation, and the setup kept fighting back. Equipment gave them trouble. Props malfunctioned. Keanu and Alex had to play excitement while getting knocked around inside something that felt less like a magic machine and more like a punishment device. Winter later talked about how hard those scenes were. Keanu went even harder. He compared it to a death ride canoe from the worst carnival ride imaginable. The part that gives Bill and Ted its magic is the part the cast hated most. Number 6. The strangest thing about Bill and Ted's excellent adventure is that the movie survived writing, casting, and filming, then nearly died after it was finished. By that point, the hard part was supposed to be over. The cast was set. The phone booth worked. The movie was finished. It was built for a 1988 release, and everything should have been pushing toward theaters. Instead, the whole thing fell into a hole. The Dino De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, the company backing and distributing the film, collapsed into bankruptcy. Just like that, Bill and Ted lost its release path. A completed movie suddenly had nowhere to go, no clear distributor, no safe plan, no guarantee it would ever get out. What should have been the last stretch turned into a long stall. The film sat in limbo for about a year while people tried to figure out whether it would be sold off, dumped somewhere smaller, or simply disappear. Her carried around a rough cut, showing it to possible buyers and hoping somebody would understand what kind of movie they were looking at. A lot of them didn't. The people deciding its future were often older executives who just could not hear the movie the way young audiences would. Bill and Ted's whole rhythm, the slang, the Valley Dude looseness, the goofy sincerity, did not sound fresh to them. It sounded alien, confusing, wrong. At one point, things got bleak enough that the movie was being talked about as a possible television dump instead of a real theatrical release. That could have been the end of it. What changed everything was the audience the industry had underestimated from the start. Teen test screenings were held, including mall crowds, and the reaction flipped the story. Younger viewers got it immediately. They understood the slang. They understood the joke. More important, they liked the movie in the exact way the executives had failed to predict. Suddenly, the same movie that had been sitting around unwanted looked worth fighting over. It stopped feeling like a stranded oddball and started looking like something that could actually connect. The rights finally landed with Orion Pictures, and that gave Bill and Ted the theatrical path it had nearly lost for good. So, the movie did not almost vanish because filming went wrong. It almost vanished because it was finished, and still nobody knew what to do with it. Number 7. After all that limbo, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure finally reached theaters in February 1989. And once it did, it proved there really was an audience waiting for it. Made for around $10 million, it earned more than $40 million. A movie that had nearly been stranded was suddenly a real hit. What makes that even better is that the critics still didn't hear what the audience was hearing. A lot of younger viewers locked into Bill and Ted immediately. They got the slang. They got the rhythm. They understood that the movie was never asking them to admire these guys for being smart. Bill and Ted were funny because they were sincere, ridiculous, and weirdly lovable in a world that kept underestimating them. A lot of critics did not meet it there. The New York Times called it a painfully inept comedy. The Los Angeles Times described it as an unabashed glorification of dumbness for dumbness' sake. That split says everything. The audience the movie was speaking to heard the joke right away. A lot of older reviewers looked at two airheads in a phone booth and stopped listening. They kept showing up, and Bill and Ted stopped feeling like the stars of one surprise comedy. They started turning into real pop culture figures. The tie-ins came. And over time, the same movie some critics treated like disposable nonsense kept building the kind of reputation disposable nonsense is not supposed to get. That is how Bill and Ted outlived the reviews. Not because critics came around first, because the audience got there before them. Number 8. A lot of surprise hits get one sequel by doing the safest thing possible. Same joke, same structure, same movie with a little more noise. Bill and Ted did not go that way. Instead, it kept the same two characters and kept changing the kind of story around them. That shift starts fast with Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey in 1991. The sequel does not just go bigger, it goes stranger. Bill and Ted get killed by evil robot versions of themselves, dropped into the afterlife and forced to outplay death to get back. That is not the move of a franchise trying to coast. For some fans, that is exactly why Bogus Journey became the favorite. It takes the cheerful stupidity of the first film and runs it straight into horror comedy, surreal afterlife logic, and one of the best versions of death a studio comedy ever gave us. Then the story takes a much longer jump. Nearly 30 years later, Bill and Ted Face the Music arrives in 2022, and by then, the whole premise has aged with them. Bill and Ted are not teenage slackers anymore. They are middle-aged fathers who still have not done the one thing the future promised they would do. That changes the tone immediately. The third movie is still goofy, still warm, still built on the same good-hearted rhythm, but now there is failure sitting inside it. Regret, too. The joke is no longer just that these two guys are underprepared. It is that they are older now, and time has been waiting for them. The shape kept changing. The heart didn't. The first movie turns Bill and Ted into accidental heroes. The second throws them into a cosmic nightmare comedy. The third brings them back older, softer, and finally forced to face the promise that had been hanging over them for decades. It never stayed still. It just kept finding new ways to grow the same two idiots up. Number 9. Bill and Ted got big so fast that it started splitting into spin-offs before the movie series even had time to settle. Not into one cartoon, into two. And the strange part is that those two animated versions do not just look different. They feel like two different ideas of what Bill and Ted was supposed to become once it left the movies. The first version came from Hanna-Barbera, and it stayed closer to the world people already knew. The animation was brighter, livelier, and a lot more in tune with the original movie's goofy rhythm. More important, the voices came with real continuity. Keanu Reeves, Alex Winter, and George Carlin all returned, which gave the show something most spin-offs never get. It did not feel like a knockoff. It felt like the movies stretching into television. Then the franchise shifted. The second season moved to a different studio, and the whole identity changed with it. Part of that came from Fox Kids, which was developing a live-action Bill and Ted series, and wanted the cartoon to match that version more closely. So, Reeves and Winter were replaced by the actors playing Bill and Ted in the live-action show, Evan Richards and Christopher Kennedy. That swap changed the feeling immediately. The cartoon was no longer extending the film. It was being pulled toward a different branch of the franchise. And once that happened, everything else started changing, too. The animation got rougher. The tone got broader. In the years between movies, you can actually watch Bill and Ted splitting in real time. One version trying to stay close to the film, the other already mutating into something bigger, stranger, and more experimental. Number 10. The second cartoon had already started bending toward the live-action version Fox wanted. Then that live-action version finally showed up, and it died almost immediately. Only 7 episodes aired before it got canceled. Not a slow fade, not a version that hung around long enough to maybe find an audience later. The series showed up, failed to connect, and disappeared before it could become part of the franchise's real identity. The problem was not the premise. The problem was the faces. By then, Bill and Ted were no longer just characters the franchise could plug new actors into. They already belonged to Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter. Their chemistry was not some bonus the movies happened to have. It was the whole engine, the looseness, the rhythm, the feeling that one dumb thought could bounce between them and somehow turn into a personality that does not transfer easily, especially not in live action. Animation can hide a lot. Voice changes create distance. Cartoons already feel like a version of the thing, not the thing itself. Live action is harsher. The second audiences saw new actors trying to recreate Bill and Ted's energy. The illusion started breaking. Instead of feeling like the characters continuing, the show felt like an imitation of performances people already knew too well. The moment that happened, the whole idea went thin fast. The brand was big enough for television. It just was not strong enough to survive replacing the two guys who made it real. Number 11. Bill and Ted did not stay contained for very long. Pretty soon, it was spreading into places that made it clear this was no longer just a surprise comedy hit. Not just sequels, not just cartoons. The whole thing started turning into a real merchandise machine, which is one of the clearest signs Bill and Ted had crossed out of surprise comedy hit territory and into full pop culture property status. The toy line is one of the best examples. Kenner, the same company behind huge lines like Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Beetlejuice, and Batman, made Bill and Ted figures too. And that alone tells you how fast the franchise had grown. Bill and Ted were no longer just the stars of one surprise comedy. They had become marketable enough to stand beside some of the biggest toy-based movie properties of the era. Then the franchise kept spreading sideways. Bill and Ted moved into comics, starting with a 12-issue Marvel run in the early 1990s, then later continuing through Boom Studios, where the mythology got stretched further and in some cases helped bridge the gap between the second and third films. That kind of afterlife fit the premise perfectly. The same thing happened with video games. In 1991 alone, Bill and Ted landed on the NES, Game Boy, and Atari Lynx. Most of those games leaned right into the first movie structure, sending players through different eras to collect objects or solve history-hopping problems. By then, Bill and Ted had spread into almost every corner of pop culture. But this may have been the most unexpected place yet. Bill and Ted's Excellent Cereal. That is the moment, the franchise had fully broken through. Once 2 time-traveling slackers are turning up on a breakfast box as a most awesome breakfast adventure, they are no longer just movie characters. They are a brand people are expected to bring home, open up, and pour into a bowl before school. Bill and Ted did not just get popular enough for a sequel. It got merchandised like a phenomenon. Bonus fact, you would think Bill and Ted had already gone everywhere a late 80s comedy could go. It hadn't. The strangest afterlife was still waiting at Universal Studios. They kept showing up every Halloween. Starting in 1992, Universal Studios turned them into the stars of Bill and Ted's Excellent Halloween Adventure, a live stage show at Halloween Horror Nights that lasted all the way to 2017. That is an absurd run for anything tied to a late 80s comedy. Not a one-year stunt, a real tradition. And the show did not survive by replaying the movies. It survived by reinventing them. Every year, Bill and Ted got dropped into a new mess built around whatever pop culture was exploding at the time. Hit movies, celebrities, viral crazes, horror icons. The phone booth stayed, the chaos stayed, but the targets kept changing, which let the show stay current while the original films got older. Horror Nights was built on monsters, haunted houses, and a much darker kind of fun. Bill and Ted became the pressure valve, the loud, stupid, fast-moving comedy break in the middle of all that horror. They were not just movie characters anymore. They became the hosts of the party, and over time that turned into its own kind of loyalty. People did not just go for the references. They went for the ritual. Seeing Bill and Ted tear through another year of pop culture nonsense became part of what Halloween Horror Nights was. By the end, they had lasted on stage for 26 years, longer than most comedy spin-offs survive in any form. They did not just survive through sequels and reruns. They became a ritual. Bill and Ted isn't trying to impress you. It stays goofy and loose, but it's built on one solid thing. Two idiots who are still decent. And that decency ends up carrying the whole movie. So, tell us what you thought about these facts. And if we missed anything, drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Like the video, subscribe, and we'll keep digging into classics like this.